Elliot Kane thought he'd seen every kind of abandoned place: collapsed houses, rusting factories, towns stripped bare by time. But the email he received last night was different. No sender, no message, just a set of coordinates and a single, grainy photograph of a street bathed in thick fog. The strange part? That street doesn't exist on any map. Locals say it hasn't existed for 50 years. Yet when Elliot arrived, camera in hand, the fog parted, and there it was, perfectly preserved, silent, waiting. And in his first photo, someone was already standing behind him. Part 1. The assignment. Elliot Kane had built his career and his modest online fame on chasing places the world had forgotten. Abandoned farmhouses, rotting amusement parks, railway stations stripped to their bones. He loved the smell of dust, the creak of warped wood under his boots, the way sunlight sliced through broken windows like old movie reels. But nothing in his years of urban exploration had felt like this. The email had arrived at 2:37 a.m. No subject line, no name, just coordinates, a single attachment, and a line in the body. Photograph it before it's gone forever. The attachment was a black and white photo. A narrow street, lined with brick storefronts and vintage lampposts, disappearing into a curtain of fog. Something about it felt wrong. Not the image itself. The composition was perfect, but the details. The cars parked along the street were from the 1950s. The shop signs advertised brands that didn't exist anymore. Elliot typed the coordinates into Google Maps. Nothing. Zooming out, he realized they pointed to a rural backroad in the mountains of West Virginia, miles from any marked town. By mid-morning, he was driving there. The road wound through dense forest, branches clawing at his windshield, the sunlight thinning into a pale, muted glow. He stopped at a gas station 20 miles from the coordinates to grab coffee. The attendant, a man with weathered skin and a tobacco-stained grin, glanced at Elliot's map and frowned. "You're heading there?" the man asked. "Just a photo project," Elliot replied casually. The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Buddy, that place hasn't been here for 50 years. "What do you mean?" Elliot pressed. The man's eyes narrowed. "You'll see if it lets you." Elliot left without answering. He told himself it was just local superstition. Small towns always had ghost stories. The last stretch of road narrowed to one lane, gravel crunching beneath his tires. Fog seeped from the tree-line, clinging low and heavy to the ground. It grew thicker the farther he drove, until the world outside his windshield became a milky blur. And then, like a curtain lifting, the fog broke. Elliot slammed the brakes. Ahead of him was the street from the photograph, perfectly preserved. Every shop lit, as if expecting customers. A faint hum of music, something old, something crackling, drifted through the still air. Only, there were no people. Elliot grabbed his camera, stepped into the chill, and lifted the lens. Click. He glanced at the shot on the screen and froze. In the photo, standing just a few feet behind him in the fog, was a figure. Tall, motionless, watching. Part 2. The perfect shot. Elliot's first thought was lens flare. His second, less comforting, was reflection. But there was nothing behind him except fog and the silent, empty street. He turned quickly. No one. The figure in the photo was tall, its outline blurred like a smudge on glass. No face, no features, just a human shape swallowed in mist. Elliot's heartbeat picked up, a rapid thump in the quiet. He deleted the image. Not because he wanted to, but because keeping it felt wrong. He raised the camera again. Through the viewfinder, the town looked stranger. Details sharpened, rust-free chrome on old cars, the faint flicker of neon in shop windows, curtains shifting in upper-story apartments. And then there were the people. Not many, but enough to make his stomach twist. Men in hats, women in floral dresses, a boy clutching a balloon, all moving slowly through the street. All in black and white, as if pulled from the photo he'd been sent. Elliot lowered the camera. The street was empty again. He lifted it once more. There they were. A shiver went through him. He was seeing two versions of the same place. Further down the block, a weathered sign swung gently in the breeze. Sundown photography. Since 1947, the shop front was dim, but something about it pulled him in. He stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old chemicals. The walls were lined with framed photographs, each under a layer of grime. The images were disturbing, not for what they showed, but for what they didn't. Every person in every photo was blurred, their faces wiped away like overexposed film. The streets and buildings were crisp, perfect, but the people gone. A large, antique camera sat on a tripod in the center of the room. Its lens was pointed directly at the doorway, as if expecting him. Elliot's hand trembled as he examined one frame near the counter. It was the street outside, the fog, and him, standing exactly where he was now, camera in hand. He stared at it for a long moment, confusion and dread mingling in his gut. Then, from behind the counter, a soft click. The faint metallic winding of film. Someone was taking his picture. Part 3. The people in the photos. Elliot spun toward the sound. The antique camera in the center of the shop was still. Its wooden frame gleamed faintly in the dim light, the brass fittings catching tiny shards of sun through a cracked window. But the winding sound was gone. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. He told himself it was his imagination, an old building settling, wood contracting in the cold. But then, a faint whir click came again. Not from the camera, from the dark hallway behind the counter. "Hello," he called, voice sounding much smaller than he wanted. No answer. He hesitated, then ducked behind the counter. The hallway was narrow, lined with more photographs. And that's when he noticed something impossible. The faces weren't just blurred anymore. They were changing. In one frame, a woman in a floral dress stood smiling, head turned toward the camera. Elliot blinked, and her head was now facing away. He stepped back. Another photo shifted in the corner of his vision. A man's hands had moved from his sides to covering his face. Every picture seemed to ripple, the frozen figures squirming against the bounds of the paper, as if trying to turn fully toward him. The hallway opened into a small darkroom. An ancient enlarger sat on a table, surrounded by trays of murky fluid. On the far wall, dozens of prints were pinned up to dry. Elliot's breath caught. These weren't vintage. These were recent. One showed a young couple in modern hiking gear, frozen mid-step. Another, a teenager in a hoodie, his expression caught between fear and confusion. And then, Elliot's pulse hammered. There was one of him. He was in the same street outside, framed perfectly, fog curling around him like smoke. But this version of him wasn't looking through his camera. He was staring directly at the lens. The print was still wet, droplets sliding down his own black and white cheek. Elliot staggered back, his mind trying to claw at logic. From somewhere behind him, close enough to feel on the back of his neck, a whisper slid through the air. "You're almost developed." Before he could turn, a blinding flash filled the room. His camera strap was still around his neck, but his camera was hanging useless, lens cap on. Part 4. Fading away, Elliot's vision cleared from the flash, but something was wrong. The room looked smaller. The corners felt closer, the walls leaning in like they were breathing. He stumbled into the hallway, heart pounding. The photographs on the walls had changed again. Now, not one of them had blurred faces. Every figure's features were perfectly clear. Too clear. A shiver cut down his spine. He recognized them. The hiker couple, the kid in the hoodie, the woman in the floral dress, all staring directly at him in frozen, perfect detail. And in the last frame, him again. But this time, the photo wasn't in black and white. It was in color. Elliot backed toward the door. Outside, the street had changed. Half the buildings were gone, swallowed by the thickening fog. The music was slower now, warped and dragging, like a record spinning at the wrong speed. He sprinted down the street, toward where his car had been. It wasn't there. In its place was an empty lot with cracked pavement and weeds pushing through, as if it had been abandoned decades ago. The fog pressed closer. In the distance, he could make out silhouettes, people standing in the mist, perfectly still, perfectly spaced apart. Dozens of them. His chest tightened. He raised the camera and zoomed in. The figures came into focus. Men, women, children, all looking directly at him. And behind them, a wall of photographs nailed to a weathered fence. Dozens of portraits, each one pinned like an insect under glass. He walked closer, almost without meaning to. The photos were crisp, the ink somehow fresh. His eyes scanned the rows. He saw the hiker couple, the boy, the woman in the dress. Then, there he was. A picture of himself from behind, mid-step, walking toward the fog. The same photo that had been in the darkroom. Only now, the edges were curling inwards, like the paper was developing in real time. The whisper came again, closer, clearer. "Don't move." You're almost finished. And this time, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Part 5. The last exposure. Elliot spun around. The hand that had gripped his shoulder was gone, but so was most of the street. The fog had eaten nearly everything. Only one narrow strip of road remained, leading straight toward the heart of the town. At the end of it, illuminated by a single swaying street lamp, stood the antique camera from the shop. It was pointed directly at him. The silhouettes in the mist began to move, slow, steady steps, closing in from all sides. The air felt thick, like breathing through wet cloth. Elliot's legs wanted to run, but each step forward felt heavier, as if something were soaking into his skin. Colors around him faded. First the neon glow from the shop signs, then the deep blue of the night sky. His own hands looked pale, drained, like an overexposed print. "You're not real," he muttered to himself. "This place isn't real." The camera's shutter clicked on its own. A flash exploded, blinding, pure white. When his vision returned, he was standing in the middle of the street, completely alone. The fog had receded, revealing the buildings again. Perfect, pristine, every window lit. Only this time, the shop signs bore different names. Cars from the 1970s lined the street. Somewhere down the block, faint laughter echoed. It hit him all at once. The town wasn't gone. It just changed. Like a new roll of film. He lifted his camera, desperate to document it. But the viewfinder was black. No battery, no image, nothing. At the far end of the street, the silhouettes stood in a neat row. They weren't strangers now. They were the people from the photos. And at the center, one figure stood still, tall, camera in hand. It was him. Not the him standing here. The him from the photographs. A deep, mechanical whir click sounded, and the world went white. 1 week later, a new photographer named Jordan received an anonymous email. No subject, no sender, just a single photograph attached, a foggy street, perfectly preserved. And in the center of it, among a row of strangers, stood Elliot Kane, looking directly at the camera.